Welcome, everybody, to the live stream as part of the Armchair Dragoons Digital Convention. I am Ardwulf, a.k.a. Gary, and I am here with George Dew from Dark City Games. George, how's it going tonight? George, can you hear me? Did you lock up a little bit? We just spent the last 15 minutes, and there were no audio problems at all. Okay, good. I can hear you, so let's just hope.
And you can hear me okay.
Yeah, very now good. I can. It hitched a little bit for a second there.
Good.
So George, everybody say hi to George for one thing. And secondly, George, tell us a little bit about you as a gamer, how long you've been in the hobby, what kinds of things you enjoyed playing back in the day, and what you like to play nowadays.
Okay. So I started in war games. My brother was a very smart fellow and kind of a nerd. So we started with war games back in the 1970s. The first game I played was Africa Corps. And then after that, he introduced me to Panzer Blitz. And then we got into Squad Leader. I have the first edition of Purple Box Squad Leader from, I believe, 1977. And then my brother got into a series called Melee and Wizard, which are role-playing games by Steve Jackson. And Steve Jackson is the fantasy trip. Melee Wizard turned into the fantasy trip. The fantasy trip lasted until about 1981, 82 or so, and then out of business. So let's talk about Dark City Games in that context first. Mm-hmm. My brother, back in the day, my brother had written an adventure that he submitted to Metagaming, which is a company that produced Fantasy Trip, and we never heard anything back. So after Fantasy Trip or Steve Jackson Metagaming, those games went belly up in the early 1980s. Nothing else came up. Steve Jackson created their adventures for Gurps, but as far as Fantasy Trip, that was dead at that point. So the years rolled on. You know, I did my adult thing. Well, I went to college, did my adult thing. And then about 2005 or so, I had Phoenix. Phoenix is now 16 years old, but he was born in 2004. So by the time he was 1 year old, I was thinking, man, it would be nice to play some of these games when he grows up, to play some of these games with Phoenix. So I dusted off the copy of The Crown of Kings, which my brother Warren had submitted to Metagaming. And in those days, eBay was just coming into vogue, and I completed an adventure that I had written, and we published them on eBay and started developing following. So Dark City Games got its start by producing fantasy role-playing, science fiction role-playing, and Western role-playing. And I think we're one of the few companies that actually have any materials at all in Western role-playing. Now, my roots go back to wargaming, and I had always very much liked Squad Leader. I thought it was wonderful because all the other war games at the time addressed larger scale operations. So there was a piece and you'd be attacking the space right next to it, but it didn't take into account such things as range or force multipliers. Every piece just had its own attack factor, defense factor. So Panzer Blitz was revolutionary because at the time, Panzer Blitz had ranges, so you could shoot at another piece that was 8 spaces away. And Panzer Blitz was a much smaller unit level, which made the tactics more interesting. So Panzer Blitz came out, Panzer Leader, and then Arab-Israeli Wars, and then Squad Leader came out. And Squad Leader took the scale down even leader or weapon that was then handled. So I had loved Squad Leader. I had put away for several years, but then when I went to college, I played Squad Leader with a friend, and we started playing Squad Leader. And I realized that in the intervening several years, there had been a lot more rules added. And to me, it seemed like every time I touched a piece, there was a rule why I couldn't do whatever I was trying to do. And it became very frustrating. And unfortunately, about that time, Squad Leader got so encumbered by rules that I lost interest in it. Well, once Dark City Games started getting some critical mass and started growing, we started adding some war games, specifically squad level war games, which each piece is a 10-man squad, or a machine gun, a cruiser weapon, an anti-tank gun, um, or a tank, an individual tank. And one thing we've done, and that line of games is called combat boots. In combat boots, we've done one more thing that I don't think anybody else has, is that a piece can also represent an individual aircraft unit. And the aircraft unit can attack ground units, but also they can have dogfights against each other. So with the set of counters, with the set of numbers on an aircraft, you can have dogfights. We're coming out with the Battle of Britain game, where the fighters can attack bomber formations and the fighters can have fighter combat. And the same units with the same ratings on the unit can be called in for close air support used in a ground situation. So combat boots, our first game was more theoretical, Battle of the Bulge, so it wasn't that historic. But we put out the rule set. We made some adjustments because initially it was supposed to be geared for miniatures. So it was difficult to implement something such as being pinned. And quickly we realized that didn't work. So we changed rules a bit. So Battle of the Bulge was our first game. And then we realized that it was too theoretical. It wasn't historic enough. So the second game we put out was Guadalcanal. And we did a lot of research for that. And I mean, there's a lot of literature. So when we put out a game, we read first-hand accounts. There's a lot of first-hand accounts on Guadalcanal. We read through all the histories we can find. In Guadalcanal, we found a Marine Corps major or colonel's after-action report on Guadalcanal, which was the official after-action report for the battle. So the battles that we included in the Guadalcanal game are very, very historic. You can't get the exact counter. You don't, if there was a platoon there, you don't know whether it had 3 squads or through attrition had only 2 squads in effect. But you can get the general unit composition, the terrain, with Google, you can get an accurate view of Alligator Creek or Henderson Field, where Henderson Field was at the time. So Guadalcanal was pretty darn historic. Then our third combat boots game was Operation Battle. And the reason we wanted to do that is we had one game in the Western European theater of operation. We had a game for the Pacific theater of operation. And so we wanted to hit the North African theater of operation. So we chose Operation Battle. And we had the capital units that fought at the time, which were early war British tanks, Panzer, some Panzer Is, some Panzer IIs, a few Panzer IVs with a 75 millimeter short howitzer. So we were able to get an accurate piece mix, but there wasn't nearly as much historic data on the tactical level for Operation Battle Axe as it was on Guadalcanal. So we did the best considering the sources that were there, and we were able to create what I think is a pretty reasonable assessment of the battles that are covered in that battle. So those are the 3 war games that we put out so far. We have 2 war games that are in the wings that are close to being released. One is the early years of Operation Barbarossa. So that means the Battle of Brest Fortress, going on to Minsk, Smolensk, and then the first Battle of Moscow. And that's all with the combat boots system. And then the other game that we have that hopefully will be released this year is Battle of Britain. And that's compatible because areas have the same compatibility dogfights with formations under the same. What Dark City Games does, because of the way the interest developed, is from 2005 until about 2000, actually fairly recently, 2008, we were putting out fantasy role-playing games. The games have fantasy genre. Then we started writing science fiction role-playing games, and then we've written a few Western role-playing games. And these are all compatible with Gurps and the Fantasy Trip. And those of you who are familiar with Steve Jackson games and Melee Wizard, the Fantasy Trip, know that he reacquired the rights to the Fantasy Trip in 2017, I believe. And then there was a Kickstarter. It came out again in 2019. Wonderful to see the revitalization of the system. It's just a classic system, just wonderful. And we had started writing the adventures in 2005. At that time, nobody owned the rights. So we wanted to include a basic set of rules so that people could play the adventures, but we were careful, or I think that we were careful not to step on any copyright violations, and I hope that's the case. But our intention was never to compete with the rules that Steve Jackson put out. And this is 2005, so there's nothing out there at the time. But we were careful not to, step on the system that he created. So our adventures are all compatible, but they're not rules heavy. We don't have a really fixed set of rules. The rules we distribute on our website, darkcitygames.com, and we have solo adventures that you load and play free of charge, a couple fantasy, a couple science fiction, and we include the rules with the adventures, but obviously they're not as detailed as TFT rules or as Gurps. So you can certainly buy our adventures and then go back and buy the fantasy trip by Wizard, by Gurps, and use those rules to play with our adventures. So that's in a nutshell what we do at Dark City Games. And again, it's darkcitygames.com. You can follow us on Facebook. And we're
link is in the video description.
Increase. We I'm
There's
sorry?
There's a link to Dark City Games website in the video description for those who have not been there.
Excellent.
So we are having some lag here,
And
especially audio lag. So sorry about that, folks. I don't know that there's much we can do about it.
Yeah, sorry about that. That's my fault. Don't have the best.
Well, it's
Wi-Fi
the hotel's
right
fault anyway.
But anyway, yes. My apologies. Hold on. I think we have a bit of lag.
Okay.
Okay,
So
I think back. So I think can you hear me?
we can hear you now.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Another.
It's all good.
Reason why, okay, good. Another reason. Okay, very good. Another reason why I was so interested in this tactics is I was a Navy SEAL from 1984 until 1990. I served at SDV Team Wood, a lot of places that I'm familiar with small unit tactics. Anyway, so I have a great deal of experience. I really enjoyed Squad Leader because of the small unit tactics. But there's been some technical arguments as to how can you take out a tank if you're an infantry unit. And I have a lot of friends who are armor officers, some friends who are artillery officers. So we're able to get some real technical aspects. We're able to capture the technical aspects of the operations within the framework of fairly simple rules. And again, Dark City Games focuses on rules that are simple, easy to learn, and quick to play. Because nowadays you're competing against video games, and if I want to play against my kids, it can't be complicated rules because they can easily pick up their PS2 or whatever, or their Switch, and start gaming there. Whereas if they want to do something with me, they have to learn rules. So the focus is on very, very simple rules. So you see on that, the top row, Village of the Dead, Uprising, those were just put out this year. Our fantasy role-playing games, Blood in the Dust, Sunset at Silver Creek, Western role-playing games. All these games are scripted so that they're ready to play. You can purchase them. You can play the game right away. You'll see some science fiction on the next roll, Void Station, Oasis, Dark Star, at Empire's End. And these games are also written so that they can be played solitaire. And as you get older, I don't know if everybody's in this boat, but my gaming group is long gone. So lots of times if I want to game, the easiest thing to do is play game solitaire. So these adventures are written much like Do Your Own Adventures books from the 1970s or 80s, but they're interspersed with one-on-one combat using you can use TFT rules to play out the combats or Gurps rules to play out the combats. So it's a combination of a game book and also some tactical combat as well. Okay, and then if you scroll down, you'll see that there's Operation Battle Axe, Guava Canal, and Battle of the Bulge as well.
It looks like you've got some horror stuff in here as well.
Yes, we do. We have a little bit of everything, which is kind of fun. I know that there's a lot of war gamers, so you can see Here, there's Operation Battle Axe with the kind of the tan pieces because it's desert. You see Guadalcanal in the green and the Battle of the Bulge in the blue. And these games, we like to concentrate on simple mechanics, but we think that there's enough difference in the units, in the way the game is played, that you can capture a great deal of the tactical feel without being encumbered by a lot of rules. And again, the rules are available to download. So the Legends rules, Legend of the Ancient World, Legends of Time and Space, the science fiction group, Legends of the Ancient West are rules for Western role playing. Yeah, there you go. And then there's also rules for combat boots on the website, or there should be for combat boots on the website as well. So any of these games, and you'll see there's a few free sample, Orcs of the High Mountains, Sorcerer's Manor. Those are sample free games for Legends of the Ancient World. SOS is sample free rules for science fiction role playing. Repel Border, Starboard, the same thing. So we have a lot of materials available. We have pieces, we have a few boards, and then we have all the rules. So if you have questions, say you're interested in Operation Battle Axe, but you're not quite sure because you're not sure what the gaming system is like, you can download the Combat Boots rules and read through them and get a feel for what the game's like before you have to lay out any money for it. Okay. So anyway, that in a very long nutshell, that kind of gives an overview of Dark City Games.
So that's great, and especially, I know that so as you mentioned, for those not familiar with the story, someone, I don't know who, what person or entity had retained the rights to most or all of the metagaming stuff, and Steve Jackson did not have the rights to the Fantasy Trip for a long time. But on the other hand, if you've seen the Fantasy Trip, which is something that kind of predates not my history in the hobby, but predates my ability to go to game stores and see stuff. It's obvious that GURPS is an evolution out of the Fantasy Trip that it eventually turned into very much its own thing. But there's strong mechanical roots. And in fact, the first GURPS release was Man to Man, which was basically the melee of GURPS. It was just the fantasy combat system. Which I had at one point, and one of those many generations of things I foolishly got rid of. But I never owned any of the. I was excited about GURPS when it was announced, and I somehow didn't get a copy for myself until the 3rd edition. At some point, like a GURPS first edition book of some kind, it was a box set at the time. And one of the books came into my possession at some point. I may actually still have that. But of course, GURPS became known as the game with a supplement for literally everything, right? So you could literally, yes. Here's a book on ancient Rome. Here's a book on Skynet taking over and killing all the humans. Here's a book on, wizards. Here's literally a book just based on modern historical mysticism. So you had this enormous toolkit that is now still around, now in its 4th edition, still actively being supported by Steve Jackson Games. But for the current edition, the books are much more self-contained rather than 100 books. All those those old GURPS books are still around. But rather than 1 million different books, there's a smaller number of larger books that contain pretty much all the same stuff. And it's pretty... I mean, it was designed to maximize compatibility with whatever, right? It was designed so that if you found something in an adventure or a monster or whatever in another game, it's all real world units, so you could just bring it in. The idea that you'd have pretty much full compatibility with GURPS is perhaps not surprising, even though you've got your own sort of very high level, I'll say high level, I guess, rule set that I did glance at the other day. Is visibly in the sort of Fantasy Trip / GURPS family. But is very simple. I mean, the fantasy rules here that I see is 8 pages, something like that, 8 pages. So very simple rules.
8 pages if you include the magic. Yeah.
And the cover page. So So yeah, one of the more compact pieces of RPG work that I've seen, even counting stuff back from the very late 70s or early 80s. And so the late, I think I want to talk about this. The late 70s and early 80s, so you say 78 to 82 or so, were kind of a weird, maybe 83 or 84 for some companies, were kind of a weird era where there were, on the one hand, games that really tried to simplify things. And on the other hand, there were other games that really tried to make everything as detailed as possible. I mean, on the one hand, you have a thing like, well, the Fantasy Trip would be one example, where it's very simple and very straightforward. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have something like Chivalry and Sorcery, which was very complicated even at the time. So I find it interesting that you've kind of stepped back into that sort of old school mindset with these rules. And particularly interesting because there is a movement inside the RPG community. I don't know if community is the right word here, but sort of in the RPG ecosystem that actively advocates for the adoption of these very old school Renaissance ideas. So was any of that old school Renaissance in your mind when you began to publish these things? I don't know what the exact timetable was, so I don't know because that's been around for
I think
10 or 12 years now, I believe.
Yeah, I think when we started publishing adventures, it was 2005. So I think that actually predates the old school Renaissance, if you will.
Okay.
So going back, Brett Winters, who's my partner at Dark City Games, my business partner there, just mentioned that how he says that when metagaming went belly up, Howard Thompson retained the rights to metagaming. And so Steve Jackson, he had been working for metagaming. There's some thought that no longer have the rules. And then for a while, people were some ungodly amount of money for the rights to TFT. But then I talked to, I forget who I spoke with, but he was a lawyer in Texas. And he said that he thought that when metagaming went belly up, that the rights to the games were owned by some bank someplace. And so he supposes that nobody owned the rights. Was it Ty Beard or somebody said that he thought that nobody owned rights to TFT for a while. So when Steve Jackson got the rights back in 2017, it was his for the taking for all the titles that he created. For us, we just wanted to play the game again. So we created the program adventures. We called them their solitaire playable adventures, and people could enjoy it. They could use the TFT rules that they had purchased in the late 70s and 1980s. They could use those rules, and they could use the Gurps rules, and they could play the adventures. And now there's more material. So it benefits the game systems because there's meat for the game systems to use. And for us, we just, I just want my kids to enjoy what I enjoyed as a kid. Ability, the same stats.
So one of the really interesting things, you're cutting out on me again, George. Sorry.
It's compatible if you. Oh, sorry. I'll repeat the last bit I said. As long as you.
Yes, thank you.
Stats. Your benchmark.
Yeah, we didn't get any of that.
So,
sorry.
Our objective was the games back playability again. I think I lost you for a minute.
Yeah, we lost all that pretty much.
Gary,
one of the things that I think is that I've always thought is interesting, and this is really kind of a GURPS thing, but it's relevant to what you're doing here. Since the third edition, there has been, of course, a GURPS Lite, right, which is like a 32-page booklet that you could download for free, or if you find Steve Jackson Games at a convention, you can get a physical copy. I've got like 10 copies of that. But there's one for fourth edition too, the current fourth edition rules, and I only mention that because it's the current one rather than I care. I mean, I don't care
Mhm.
third edition or fourth edition, but the idea is that it's this sort of because GURPS is so modular, you could just run your whole game right out of that book, and it gives you a very simple starting point that you can then hang whatever GURPS apparatus you want onto. What you've got here is actually something that's even more streamlined than that, where you've got this whole thing kind of pared down to 5 or so pages. So that's really interesting to me that you've managed to do that, to create a kind of a self-contained rule set that also happens to be A, really self-contained, and B, also happens to retain high compatibility with things like GURPS and the Fantasy Trip, which is also suggests to me that maybe that was a motivation. Correct me if this is wrong, for doing things as diverse as Westerns and sci-fi and fantasy and horror and all the other stuff that I see on the webpage. So,
Yeah. So yes, the focus is simplicity. If you take the magic rules out of the basic Legends of the Ancient World rules, the rules are 4 pages or something like that, and so it allows for maximum playability. But it also means that, hey, if you want to apply GURPS rules to that adventure, you can. And you know, if you want to, we kind of got started on TFT, so if you want to buy TFT rules, we encourage you to, and you can. But this way, you don't buy an adventure and you're just left hanging there with no rules. And back in the day when I started out, you had to buy the first module because the second module was contingent upon you having purchased the first. So I kind of wanted people to be able to pick up the book and at least have rules in it so they could play the book. But there's compatibility, so you can play all the GURPS stuff or you can play TFT. Now, the GURPS booklets that you mentioned earlier, GURPS had ancient Rome, you know, Western, had prehistory, had amazing world books, and they're just really, really rich sources of information. When you write a fantasy adventure, it's reasonably, I shouldn't say easy, but it's not difficult in terms of fact checking because it's fantasy, so you can make up stuff. So you have to have consistency in the plot, you have to have consistency in suspension of disbelief, but you don't have to do that much fact checking. When you write a Western, now you have to do a lot of fact checking. So did they have repeating rifles in 1867? Were they widespread enough that you could purchase them? So all of a sudden, the way you equip your characters in that adventure, you have to research that. What sort of Plains Indians would you have run into in what was then Kansas Territory? Would you have run into the Crow? Would you have run into the Cheyenne? What Indian tribes would you run into in that area? So there's a lot of fact checking that you have to do if you're running a Western adventure. So honestly, the GURPS world books give you a lot of detail in helping you write an adventure. So the GURPS are just wonderful products. And I'm going to jump around here a little bit. When we do these games, we talk to a lot of people, and necessarily the first edition, there's flaws in them. So Brett and I, we bounce stuff off each other, which helps a lot because I think myself make mistakes. But then Phoenix will play a game and he catch a mistake and we'll talk to somebody else. So the game production process requires a lot of people to look at stuff and test it and for you to catch errors. We had an argument with one person about taking out tanks, like infantry taking out tanks, and a lot of the first-hand accounts I read is if the infantry lacked tank weapons, it was people were scared, and that appears first-hand accounts from World War II going on. Ironically, I actually know a person who took out a tank in the first Gulf War, and he was with the Marine Corps unit, and the Iraqis had withdrawn, so the tank was no longer covered by infantry, which means now that people can sneak around the tank has some invisibility. But there was one Iraqi tank that decided to stay and fight, and everybody else had withdrawn. But there was also terrain that allowed the infantry to circle around the tank. So the Marine Corps infantry platoon, in this case, a bunch of guys drew straws, and the one guy who eventually took out the tank drew the short straw. He took a haversack ran around behind the tank, jumped up aboard, pulled the fuse on the thing, and as it was jumping off, the tank swiveled its turret. It hit him in the back. Swiveled its turret. He ran over a sand berm and destroyed the tank. The tank blew up. When he left the Marine, you do a physical when you leave the services. And when he left the Marine Corps, they did x-rays on him, and his spine had shattered bone all over the place. It had healed by then, but he had gotten his spine shattered. And when you're young, you're strong, you're healthy. And he actually remembers having back problems after jumping off that tank and getting hit by the barrel. But he didn't realize it was bad as it is. But anyway, the point there is that in a game, you try and capture the realism as best you can, but you want to create as simple rules as you can, because the complexity should not be in the rules. The complexity should be in applying the tactics to defeat a tactical situation. That's our philosophy. We feel that the rules are simple and the mechanics are simple. Now you got to figure out how to get around that pillbox and take it out. You got to figure out when you can call in artillery to take out clear an area in front of you. You got to figure out when you can best apply an airstrike. So in that context, we like to keep the rules simple, and we like for the tactical situation to present itself and for the problem solving to be done on the tactical situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. That is certainly not everyone shares that philosophy, especially this is true in role-playing too, but it's definitely true in the wargaming space, where there's kind of two different threads happening, and there's been tension between these two different ideas for decades now, between let's do real simple games or let's do these really detailed, super complicated games that try and have a simulative rule for absolutely everything. So neither approach is of necessity correct or incorrect, but there's two different ways to look at it, right? And certainly, I think the tendency in the RPG side in recent, say, 20 years or so, has been to lean into the lower complexity stuff. Not this low complexity necessarily, but what you have here is a very interesting, very old school sort of, really shows the wargaming roots of role playing. Jim Ozarski and I were talking about this a little bit on Monday's stream, and he makes the point that he thinks D&D is still a war game, and I don't know that he's necessarily wrong. But certainly that's hidden behind a lot of other stuff, like character details and stuff that you don't necessarily see in war games. But here, where you have kind of the basics of here's how you move, here's how you fight, here's how injury works, it's much more obvious, because you're kind of laying out the underlying physics of the game space, and with very simple rules, and that's very much what you see in war games too.
Yeah, and so when we write an adventure, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
When we write okay, sorry, there's a little bit of
that's the lag. It's the lag that's doing that.
Yeah. Okay. When we write a role-playing adventure, there's got to be a plot. There's got to be conflict, but there's got to be a consistent framework in believability. But basically, the adventure glues together different tactical wargaming situations. So, say hypothetically, 4 characters. I have a fighter, I have an archer, I have a wizard, and then I have another fighter or something like that. So the story makes it interesting in an overall strategic sort of kind of a concept, if you will. But ultimately, you intersperse battles into the story. If you have just a story, then you kind of lose something. If you have just the battles, then you lose the story. So we feel that the role-playing adventures have to have both. You have to have a story to string everything together, but you have to have interesting, tactically different battles that you have that allow you to play out the fights. So that contention is a good contention. A role-playing game is at its core a bunch of war games, or a bunch of war game battles. So I think what you say is true. And we've had, say hypothetically, we're writing up a fantasy role-playing adventure. Say we decide that we can, if we put 25 locations in it, it'll be long enough people will like it. But if we put 40 locations, now it's too long. And my son complains, "Hey, Dad, we started an adventure. We can't finish it that night. We can't finish it the next night, and I'm not going to see you for a week." So if you put too many encounters, it draws the game out to the point where it's too long. So we've been experimenting with the right number of rooms or right number of encounters or locations, if you want to call it that. Now, if you have 25 locations and only 3 or 4 of them are fights, that means you've only got 3 or 4 combat encounters in this long adventure. That's not enough. If you have, and the old way it did when Steve Jackson first created TFT or Melee Wizard TFT, they put out a series of solitaire role-playing adventures, the program adventures, and those are basically combat and follow list. And some of them were really fun. There's one adventure I remember called Grail Quest, which was my favorite because it wrapped the combats in the context of a plot, and I thought the Grail Quest was just wonderful. So when we're writing out our adventures, we have to balance the number of combat encounters with the story. You don't want to go too heavy on each. You need to mix them up so that they're kind of a good balance. It keeps play interesting, And I feel that the adventures that we write, I think Brett does a wonderful job of that. I think Matt does a wonderful job, and I try to do my best. But we've had a lot of success in the games we put out. People have given us very, very positive feedback on it. So I think we're doing something right there. If we're not, then we're going to try to correct it.
So you have, I noticed that you have a wide variety of different adventures and several different authors' names, including yourself, that I see on them. Let's talk about like physical presentation. So when folks order from Dark City Games, they're getting a physical product back in the mail, correct?
Yes. So the booklet, you get a booklet, and it's 5.5 by 8.5. So it's a kind of a half a letter size page. Booklet.
Yeah.
And the booklet has the adventure, which might be as low as 25 locations and up to 35 to 40 locations. And then in that booklet, you also have the rules. Excuse me. And that's basic character generation, skills, magic, equipment, and how to play the game. And every game might have specifics. For example, Brett wrote a science fiction adventure called Void Station. In this case, you're coming out of deep space. You want to refuel at this void station. So you get lined up, you dock to the void station, get ready to refuel, but there's nobody there. So because you're needing refueling, you also need to replenish your supplies. Your oxygen is low. So now you have to get into the void station, figure out what's going on. But you have the limit of oxygen, so it kind of pushes you because you have to get stuff done before you run out of oxygen. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. What was the question again?
The just the physical formats was what I was asking about.
Physical.
Yeah. So they're what I would probably call. I don't know if they're digest size, but that's the term I would probably use. But they're basically like half a letter size.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, so it's digest size, and then you get a cardboard set of pieces, and that's 40 pieces, which represent your crew. You might have 4 players in your crew. It represents some of the people that you'll encounter, some of the bad guys, some of the neutrals. Sometimes it's used to represent obstacles. So you get a set of playing pieces. Now, because we're trying to keep costs down, so the game itself sells for $12.95. And at $12.95, it's not that expensive. So we try to keep costs down. So the cardboard is a very light cardboard. You have to cut out the piece yourself. But it's not as thick as war games you buy, but then again, it's a lot cheaper. So we have cardboard pieces. And then you have an 11 by 17 inch game board, which is, it's a plastic bag game. We're looking at at different printing companies to try to get full bleed cover, full bleed board. I think the artwork on the whole, the cover art, the board art, has been pretty well received. So we don't want to change the quality of the art. We want to hopefully increase the quality of the components, make the cover a little bit shinier, glossier, better texture, the board maybe make it a better quality. So we're trying to do that, but we don't want to increase prices. So if you buy a game, you get the game book and the rules, which is in one book. You get the pieces and you get the board. And that's true for the fantasy role-playing games, science fiction role-playing games, Western role-playing games, and the war games as well. So now the war games, the pieces are a little bit smaller. So if you get 40 character pieces in a role-playing game, you get, I think you get, maybe you get 60 tank, infantry, artillery counters in a war game, because war game is slightly smaller. And the squares are about an inch across, and because then it works well. You can cover a lot of terrain, but it's not for clumsy people like me. The pieces aren't so small that you're going to fumble with the pieces. So the game itself for $12.95, and that's the components that you get when you purchase the game.
So it sounds like you don't do it in, you don't have other than the free downloads, which is actually I showed earlier, there's actually quite a few of those. Yeah. It sounds like you don't sell additionally in PDF or print and play.
We've
just electronic versions.
There's been talk about it. We haven't done that yet. And some people really like the physical components. Mm-hmm. Every now and then we get asked for PDF components, but that's usually by people overseas, and the overseas shipping gets to be a huge pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Every game we ship is like $5, and so if a person buys 3 games, next thing you know, they're paying $15 in shipping costs for a very light booklet. So I can understand how people get frustrated with that, but we're kind of limited by the merchant bank, the clearinghouse, with what we can do. So we would like to reduce shipping costs, but we can't always do that, you know. But, mm-hmm. but that's what they get. We're thinking about what we're hoping to do. Obviously, this isn't going to happen right away. Is that we're hoping to create a subscription system where it would be turn-based, but where if you buy the subscription, you know, you get every single game that's put out that year, and then you get all the library of games on a phone app, because we have over 30 titles, or I guess 3 war games and 27 fantasy, science fiction, and role-playing game titles. So of those 27 titles, we would take all the intellectual property, put it on the web, and you could access it through your phone, which takes out the drag, the rules and calculus and stuff. Some people, I do, but I'm old school. So with the phone app, you'd be able to play through all the different encounters or all the different adventures, keep your set of characters, and we keep track of all the bookkeeping, so you won't have to do that. But that's a few years down the road. We're not quite there yet. Immediately in the next several months, Brett is working on an adventure right now. I kind of wish he was on so he could go over details. He put out Uprising, which was well received, and his games are wonderful games. So that game's coming out. We have another Western, or categorized Western, but we're trying to do it from the native. So it's from a native tribe, and they're dealing with some of the issues they're dealing with, which they may or may not run up against Western people or white people. But the context there is different. It allows for, as I said earlier, Westerns are very historic. So you have to do a lot of historic research to make sure everything is within that framework. But our Westerns are generally not fantastic, or they're basic Westerns. From the indigenous people point of view, the enemies would be, the context would be slightly different. It allows for a little bit more mysticism, not what fantasy does, but it allows for a little bit more leeway in what you do, what you want to do with mysticism. Now, we're careful there, because what we would write would would clearly have to be congruent with beliefs and different conflicts that were in play at the time. So a lot of research has to go into that. And, we don't want to release anything that portrays something inaccurately or offends anybody. So we want to be careful about that. So we have Brett's Adventures coming out. We have Western coming out. And then again, the 2 war games, Operation Barbarossa, which pretty much follows Army Group Center in 1941. And then the Battle of Britain will be coming out soon. So we're trying to increase all those series of games. We've had an increase in interest within the last couple of years. We have a new marketing director. Would you like to come on screen for a second? Okay. Well, we have a marketing director who's been really just wonderful in helping us get the word out to people, and she's just been wonderful. And that's given us a better platform to produce games and put up more stuff that we hope people enjoy. So.
That's great. So, have you considered, like, I'd hate to, I think this sounds stupid actually to start asking you questions like this, but have you considered, like, well, let me ask it this way. Do you print this stuff on demand as needed, or are you using like an offset printer? You order it in small batches? How does that work at your scale of operations?
Okay, it's pretty much print on demand. And here's the conundrum we run into. If you print something on ink, that's the preferred way, because the ink actually seeps into the paper. If you print out a game board and you fold it so that you can put it in a bag and send it to the customer, the folds, unfortunately, if you print it with toner, the folds sometimes crack the toner. So as you fold the board, you get white seams. And we've been trying to get that fold a little bit more.
Don't even get me started on this subject.
So we have difficulties now. Ideally, the best thing would be an offset printer, because then the ink seeps into the paper, you can fold it, everything's good. But the offset printer requires such a long run of copies that even though the per unit cost of the copy would be relatively low, it requires such a long run of copies that we don't really have the financial capability to do it at this point. Because for 30 games, if we had to print out 500 copies of 30 games, you're talking, lots and lots and lots of games. My math is bad. So right now it's printed out digitally. And like I said earlier, we're trying to make better quality covers, glossier printing. The game boards, we're trying to make them look nicer. And then we're trying to do full bleed. Right now we have the white margin around the edge of the game, but we're trying to do that full bleed, for both the booklet and for the board. So we're trying to improve the quality of the components, but we had some complaints when sending out sets of 3 or 4 games that the envelopes were tearing. So we finally found a better set of envelopes, polyurethane or high-deck envelopes that are better. So we're always trying to improve what we're putting out, because we don't want somebody to get a game that's beat up or a game that's torn or folded, So it is what it is.
Well, I mean, you're not, Wizards of the Coast either. So, let's be realistic here. So, I mean, who knows what their print runs are even like? I wouldn't even know, but they're astronomical, I'm sure. And in like small quantities and stuff like that, folks do what they have to do. You're also your price points are quite reasonable as far as I can tell. And actually the art looks, from what I've seen, just based on the covers and some of the covers of some of the downloads, the art is quite nice, I think. So there's some really quite nice black and white line art in here.
Let me plug our cover artist. We use a guy named Dave Miller, and Dave Miller played TFT way back in the day. He's done some wonderful artwork for us. And Dave was actually approached by one of the people who, way back a long time ago, one of his friends approached him and said, "Hey, your artwork's great. We're going to put out a card game. Would you like to do the artwork for the different pieces on the card game?" And when you're an artist, you hear these, "Oh, this would be a great thing," so many times, and it's going to be great. And so Dave was kind of like, "Yeah, I guess I'll pass on that." Well, it turned out those end up being Pokemon cards.
Oh,
so had Dave taken up that offer at the time, he'd be all set for now. But Dave has done wonderful artwork for us, just beautiful artwork. We're really pleased about that. The internal pieces, the black and white art, we used a set of a Jake Miner. There's a series of brothers who've done artwork, just wonderful stuff. And we used Jake Miner for a lot of the artwork, for the internal artwork, and that was great. As a small operation, we're a small gaming company. We're doing it as a hobby, not to make money. We still have day jobs. So there was a while in there where my money job wasn't that great. And so we're trying to cut costs using digital, not really clip art, but stock art. And so you're kind of more limited there. We're very happy with Dave Miller's art because he will do what we want. And then in the early days, we used an artist named Nicole Cardiff who did a lot of our artwork for us. And we're happy with what we've got. They've done a wonderful job for us. And the key here, we want to continue to put out quality artwork, quality pieces, quality board. Because at the end of the day, it's all about, I want somebody to buy Dark City games, play it with their kid or play it solitaire and enjoy it. I mean, that's the whole reason. That's the whole reason the whole thing works. Our cover art is great. The one thing about certain artists, we used a guy who was doing the internal pieces, the little internal pieces at one time, and he did some wonderful pieces for us. And I had wanted him to do another set of pieces, didn't hear from him, tried to contact him, never heard back. And then when I went to some of the websites he had put up, all the websites were down, so I don't know what happened to him. So I ended up drawing the piece sets for some of the more recent adventures, Village of the Dead, Uprising, because you got to do what you got to do. But I fear that some of these artists are aging like me. So Mark Hill, who had done our internal pieces for a long time, I was never able to get a hold of him, so I don't know what happened to him. But time moves. So, but we're trying to increase. Yeah. Anyway, so
you mentioned a couple of future upcoming products as well. Is there any paradigm shaking products on the horizon? Anything like a full rule set or expanded rule set maybe?
Yeah, actually, so the bread and butter of what we do are role-playing games, fantasy, science fiction, and Western role-playing games. Mm-hmm. So we'll continue writing for that genre because they're well-received. People like them. We're going to continue on that. We feel that the adventures that we put out, people really like them. So we're going to continue doing that. And we had been doing about 4 a year. We're going to try to target putting out 6 games a year because that's a little bit, it puts us into a different, you keep people's interest. When we first started out, the first year we're in business, we put out 2 or 3 games, and we went to Gen Con, went to 2 Gen Cons, and then we skipped a year because we all have money jobs to pay the bills. And I think we lost a lot of customers in the year we skipped, so we lost momentum. So, of course, we're going to continue with the role-playing games. The war games, I think that there's a big war game audience out there, especially people who enjoyed Squad Leader, who felt that Squad Leader was a little bit too complex, or Advanced Squad Leader. So we have Pacific Theater, we have North Africa, with European Theater of Operations. We're soon going to get Eastern Front. And Squad Leader can be expanded a great deal because that can go into late war, it can go into Vietnam, Korea, Middle East, it can go into all sorts of conflicts. Again, the next one on the horizon is Battle of Britain, and that uses a consistent rule set that we have for air-to-air. The thing that we're adding there isn't just air-to-air with fighters, but now fighters attacking bomber formations. And that's going to be a little shift in the rule set that comes out. And then after that, what's on the horizon is 8th Air Force, daylight bombing over Germany. So the war games are very expandable. The system is really simple. I'll give you an example. Say, for instance, I have a rifle squad and edition, no matter what country you are, is generally one light machine gun or equivalent. This is in World War II. Obviously, it's different nowadays. But one light machine gun or equivalent, and then another 9 riflemen. So if you do the calculation, that comes out to about 2 firepower factors. Now, a squad of infantry, we give it a survivability rating of 2. So if I'm shooting at you, I throw 2 dice, you throw 2 dice, you throw 2 dice. If both my dice are higher than your highest die, then my unit kills your unit. If one of my dice is higher than your highest die, if only one of my dice is higher than your highest die, then I pin you. I don't destroy your unit, I pin you. So the mechanics are fundamentally simple. Now, there's as if you're in a forest, if you're entrenched, if you're undercover, then there's as for make it more difficult for me to destroy your opinion. So the mechanics of the system are very simple, and they allow a wide range in the firepower factors and the survivability factors that don't really make that much difference in the resolution of the die roll. So you're able to get greater variations. Early war Panzer II had a 20 millimeter cannon, and then a Panzer III in the early versions had a 37 millimeter cannon. So that might be one difference in firepower factor, but the way the game plays, you can get different gradations in the firepower factor and survivability, but it doesn't make the resolution complicated, and it doesn't throw the resolution out of whack. So the mechanics of the game are fairly simple. So we're going to continue to do the tactical squad level land-based combat boots games. We're going to add the air games. We're going to add some naval games to that. So we can capture some of the Guadalcanal battles. We can capture hunting down the Bismarck in the North Sea. We can capture convoys in the North Atlantic trying to sink submarines. So there's a lot of expandability in the war game area. Now, one of my sons, who's 12, Xavier, has been, we play a game that we call skirmishers. So if you're playing with 28 millimeter single figures, we've wrapped a rule context around that to make it interesting. So one of my sons has been bugging me for pirates adventure. So maybe you're the captain of a crew and you've got 40 pirates aboard ship, and you go around, you're raiding these other people, and so there's a lot of ship to ship fighting, and then you board them and all that. But because it's a skirmisher game, it's not a role-playing game where you only have 4 characters fighting 4 characters. Now you have 30 characters fighting another 30 characters. The rule set changes, and now you have a skirmisher battle where you can't do the bookkeeping and keep track of how many hits every single character is taken. So it's either they've got to be dead, or else they've got to be injured, or they're okay. So we're working on simplifying the rule set that can make the wargaming aspect a very simple battle that does not require rule keeping. But now we have a pirates game that's partly a role-playing game, partly a game book, but also has tactical skirmisher level combat that's quick, easy to play, fun to play, but doesn't require bookkeeping. So that's on the horizon. I don't know if we'll get that released in 2021, but that's on the horizon, being pushed by my 12-year-old boy, which I'm fine with. So that should be good.
That sounds pretty neat, actually. That kind of hybrid game. I guess I could think of examples, but not too many. So that actually sounds quite interesting. And who doesn't love pirates? I mean, come on. It's like dinosaurs. There you go. Next topic, dinosaurs. Or better yet, pirates riding dinosaurs in the Old West.
Yes, there we go. We've hit everything there.
Yeah, hit all the notes.
So yes. And so we have these things that we're working on. Timeline, I think Brett's adventure will be done very shortly, within a couple months. I'm putting the pressure on Brett here. After that, we'll have put out 3 consecutive role-playing games. So Nick is working on a Western, kind of in the context of Sunset at Silver Creek, but a little bit different kind of problem. So that's on the horizon. The Operation Barbarossa game is on the horizon. And when I mean on the horizon, I think maybe 6 months to 10 months out or something like that. And the Pirates game will be out next year. and Battle of Britain will be out next year. We've gotten good luck with the battle axe games. People like them. We've had some tactical quandaries. For example, if each hex is about 50 yards across or 50 meters across, for rifle range or submachine gun range, now there's variation. But then you have this class of weapon that can easily fire 500 meters. And then you have the German 88, and in the early years of the war, it could shoot out to 2,000 meters. So we had a quandary where we wanted to capture the difference in the effective range of weapons, but yet we wanted it to be small enough level in the tactical sense so that you could capture squad movements, machine gun placements, anti-tank guns, and so on. So for Operation Battle Axe, the way we resolved that is we created range bands at the end of the board. So a portion of the board was hexes, and then at the far end of the board, we had several range bands. So, for example, one weapon might have a...
It's all good. We've lost your video, but your audio is coming in totally fine.
Okay, well, let's keep the audio then.
Okay, well, that's the important part.
Yes. So the way we resolved that was with range bands. So the 88 can fire 4 range bands, but a rifle can only fire 6 spaces. A machine gun can fire 1 range band. And that way we're able to capture the range the weapon could fire, but still maintain that simple squad level movement and squad level tactical feel of the game. So there's different problems necessitate different solutions, but we do what we can to resolve those problems.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I think given that we're having plenty of technical difficulties, I think we're going to wrap up here. If anyone has any last-minute questions for George, please speak up now. Once again, I'll mention that the Dark City Games website is linked in the video description, so check that out. I think you'll find that there's a nice selection of self-contained RPG and light wargame products for very reasonable prices there. And I know that we have, from looking at the chat, it looks like we may have sold a couple during the stream here. So I do want to thank George for coming by. And I would like to thank all of the audience and participants in the chat for piping up during the Q&A. And I'd like to thank Brant and the Armchair Dragoons for allowing this fabulous event to occur in the first place. So once again, everybody, please...
Thank you very much, Gary. We really appreciate it.
I appreciate you coming on. So thanks again, everybody. Again, check out Dark City Games, linked in the video description. And, of course, stay tuned to the channel. We'll have more stuff coming as soon as Monday.
Very much, Jerry.